I call this meeting to order.
As do I, for the school board. Call to order. Everybody here? So we're going to start with the operating budget presentation and Kim Powell. That's amenable?
So just to give you an overview of the topics we'll be covering, we'll talk about our process to arrive at the proposal that we're going to share with you this evening. We'll talk about the priorities that drove this process and the outcome, the proposal that you're going to see. We'll touch on enrollment, and then we'll get into the meat, if you will, of what is in this proposed budget for next year. We provide a document that highlights what are the changes from the current budget and how that factors into the request. And then at the end, we would like to talk about, move from talking about the operating budget to the capital budget and facilities needs, which is, as you all know, has been an ongoing conversation for some number of years now. When it comes to our process, we are fanatical about every request, every change is connected to the strategic plan. Every request that comes through and is considered comes through on a form, and there has to be the strategic plan references are included on that form. Our strategic plan examines three areas: academic excellence for all, safe and supportive schools, and organizational supports. And we have specific goals in each of these three areas. The full strategic plan is available on our website. Looking at our process in a little more detail, it starts in a way, budget never stops. But the official process leading up to a proposal for the budget for a new year starts in earnest in October, when we start to lay out the schedule and the plans and all the different meeting dates. There is a lot of sharing of data and information throughout this process, and a lot of gathering input, a lot of listening to stakeholders, from the classroom to the community and everywhere in between. And the process reflects that with a number of meetings, different public outreach events. You can see those details there. This is the latter part of the process, and the gold star indicates where we are now. And this past Saturday, after all those meetings and discussions and public outreach sessions, a lot of active listening, the outcome of that is the first proposal that we share with our board, and that was done at this work session this past Saturday. And we're excited to share that with you this evening. Our school board officially adopts the budget proposal, which will then be presented to City Council on March the 4th. In addition to the strategic plan, everything that was discussed during the development of this budget was looked at and examined through the lens of equity. And we continued to discuss three different priority areas: maintaining competitive salaries, attracting and retaining high-quality staff. Education is simply a people business. The living wage rate for all employees was also top priority. And then comprehensive programs to meet the needs of all learners. This series of charts is something you've seen before. It just depicts the overall change in enrollment. On average, since the turnaround, we've grown around 1.6% a year. During that time, that's the average year-to-year change. Some years it's less, some years it's quite a bit more, but that's the average. And the bottom chart just simply reflects the different categories of students that are driving the enrollment. The gray bar represents the change in the resident population, because we also have a non-resident program. And the blue bar reflects the students of employees, both city and school employees who attend our schools. And the orange bar in the lower chart reflects the tuition-paying students. And what you see there at the bottom is that since the turnaround in enrollment, which was fiscal year 2011-2012, that school year, the number of tuition students in our population has decreased by 47. The number of students of employees, both city and schools, who are school employees, those children who are attending our schools, has increased by 34. That's not completely unexpected when you consider our growth. With that growth, we've had to hire more teachers and so forth, and it is a big attraction for teachers and others who don't live in the city but are coming into the city to work, to be able to bring their children with them when they're working for the city or for the schools. The resident population during the same time period has increased by 342 students. So that is all of the preliminary information that we have to share with you this evening, because we wanted to devote most of the time to talking about the details of the operating budget proposal and then discussing facilities. So with that, I will turn things over to Dr. Atkins.
Thank you, Kim. What I'd like to do now is go over the line-by-line recommendations that we're making to the school board for the 2019-2020 budget. So first, we've listed for you some of the expenses that tend to roll over from year to year. And we've labeled this the non-discretionary expenses. First, we have our health insurance premium increases. After talking with our broker, we're anticipating somewhere around an 8% increase. Could go higher. It could go anywhere from 8% to all the way up to 16%. We also, there are city contracts, which are our standard contracts, have been in place for a number of years, and that's in transportation and maintenance, $100,000 increase on those two contracts. Then the Piedmont Regional Education Program, some of you may recognize that as the PREP program. That's our regional special education program that we participate in, increasing by $77,000. Career and Technical Education Program, the facility which we're in now, a partnership between Charlottesville and Albemarle, increased $18,000. We would add the net revenue from the FY18 budget, the fund balance, which is $156,000. Then the net adjustments will all, with some very small contracts, around $97,000. Compensation, we want to remain competitive. That's one of our strategic goals. So we would look at salaries for teachers, raising those salaries a step plus 3.75, which is an average increase of 5%. In the governor's budget, the governor is recommending a 5% salary increase for teachers in his budget. We would also be recommending for eligible staff other than teachers a step plus 2.75%, which is a 4% increase. That would be for our building level leaders, and the division leaders would get the step plus the 2.75. One of the major areas that we realize needs to be addressed is the living wage for all of our employees. That would be for our custodians, our instructional staff, instructional assistants, and our nutritional staff. We would be raising those salaries to $15 an hour. There were other staff members, and I'm going to get Kim to help us with the methodology that we use to actually identify the staff and the positions that we would increase the hourly wage from what we currently have around $11 an hour to the $15 an hour. Kim, talk to us a little about that.
Certainly. So when we looked at the living wage priority, what we focused on were employees who are, to use a school term, they're under contract. They're signed, they are with us for the entire school year, and their hours are set. We know how many hours they're going to work per week. That's IAs, custodians, and then we have nutrition workers on various schedules that have a set schedule for the whole year, like a teacher would or any other contract employee. Then we have hourly employees who come in, and we don't know how many hours they're going to work in a year. Those employees are substitutes primarily. And those, the cost of increasing hourly wages for what we call hourly employees that are not under any kind of a contract with us, we looked at those with regard to the substitutes just mainly from a competitive standpoint, trying to make sure we were competitive with the area to be able to fulfill our sub needs.
And so for that particular group, because of the cost that we certainly realize we will incur with raising our custodian, instructional assistants, and the nutrition staff to the $15 an hour, it was cost prohibitive to factor that in during this budget cycle to increase the hourly wage for all employees who are our part-time hourly employees. So, but however, our board has asked and has a great deal of interest in seeing that we raise the hourly wage for all employees to $15 an hour. Now, this is the school-based program and supports. We would add an additional AVID teacher at Beaufort. They currently have one, so we would add an additional one. We would add a math specialist that would be working with our students with the new accountability system at the state. We feel that would be the right direction to give our students some additional support. Many of you have heard about or know about the SEAL program that we have. That's social, emotional, and academic learning for our students. We would add an additional instructional assistant, which is consistent with the current model that we have for the SEAL program. As we grow that program, we need to continue to add the supports that are necessary to maintain the model. We have a swim program that services Walker. The students from Walker go over to Crow Pool and they swim. During the day, they take swimming lessons. And that initiative started through philanthropic efforts by one of our community members. And as that support from the community starts to diminish, we have to factor that into our budget. So we'd like to keep the program, and we're putting that in the budget. Increase in special education transportation services. We're finding that there are a number of our students who are placed in day support programs outside of our school division. And so we have to incur the cost, although FAP and CSA helps to cover the cost of that educational service, we have to incur the transportation cost. So that transportation cost is rising. I will say, though, we have posted now positions to hire drivers within our school division rather than depending on contract services for transportation. Add an iSTEM teacher at the elementary school level. We currently have 4 iSTEM teachers. We'll add an additional one. Our goal is to have an iSTEM teacher at each of our elementary schools. Maintain our AVID program. Again, this is an area in which we have been receiving grant funding, and that grant funding is going to go away for next year, so we have to supplement the program. Maintaining our Extending the Bridges of Literacy after school program. That also is grant funding, and again, the grant funding is starting to decrease, and so the share that the school division will incur has increased also accordingly. Add a PK2 Family Connections Facilitator. Many of you have met or seen on Twitter Velvet Coleman, who works in our community. This will be an additional position like that of Velvet Coleman, who works with students who are 3, 4, 5 years old, all the way up to 2nd grade, working with students and families to strengthen the connection between the home and the school. As we start to move forward to work with the city to strengthen our transportation system, we would incur a small increase in cost if we had a director of pupil transportation services. Security improvements. Each year we apply to the state for grant funding for security improvements, and our share of that grant, when the grants are awarded to us, our share is somewhere around $75,000, so we would be applying again, and that would be our share of the grant. Family Connections instructional materials that would coordinate with that add of the Pre-K2 Family Connections Facilitator. Increased tuition reimbursement. Currently, we reimburse our staff, our full-time staff, $500 for courses that they will take. We had in mind with this, we have a teacher shortage, and we have a number of instructional assistants who have indicated that they desire to get a teacher's license, and so this would be to support their efforts as they move forward to take the coursework that's necessary to do that. maintain our walk support, again, grant funding for Title I, Part 4A, I believe it is diminishing. Title I, 4A is diminishing, Part D. So we would be adding $30,000 to cover that decrease. Our composting, we had composting several years ago, and our provider moved away from the area. Now we have, there's a provider that's closer to Charlottesville, so we can put the composting services back in. I think there are a number of people who are excited about that. Because of teacher enrollment, we would add 2 teachers, Burnley Moran. We would also add a teacher at Jackson Via. We will increase substitute pay rates. We currently pay $85 a day. We would increase that rate to $91 a day. We also would increase and that's for day 1 all the way through day 10. If the teacher is substituting consecutively 11 days or more, we would increase that rate from $207 a day to $220 a day. We would restructure our new teacher mentoring program to provide additional supports in the classroom for our novice teachers. And then for school operations, our Serenic K-12 business system, which is a new system that we migrated over the last 2 years. This is the maintenance and support fee. That will be an annual fee that we will incur. Network bandwidth expansion. I think we're reaping the benefits of technology in a very innovative way, in a very responsible way. Our students and our teachers find great uses for the internet and the resources that are there, so we would increase our bandwidth. And 2-factor authentication, that's a security measure. The city probably has already done that, and so we're in the process of doing that now. Because of enrollment at one of our elementary schools, we would be decreasing teacher allocation there by 1. So I'm going to let Kim do an overview of the total of the requests that we have and what we're anticipating from the state to get to our funding request from the city. Yes. Yes, sir.
There you go. Nice teamwork. So I'm really interested in the tuition reimbursement aspect. Could we go back briefly? This may be to the chagrin of some of my colleagues asking if we could increase the number, but one thing, when we talk about recruitment, and one of the recruiting tools that I think would be very helpful for us, because most school divisions offer $500 in regards to tuition reimbursement. That's more or less the norm, but I wonder if it would set us apart if we were to offer a different number, whether that number be, like it's currently 500, but if it was, 600 or maybe 750, I think that would give us a competitive advantage. And I would be really interested in hearing if there was some preliminary data or some numbers of what that would do to increase the ask, because I think we would get a great deal of bang for our buck if that was another tool we could have in our shed when we're recruiting teachers.
I will make you very happy with my answer. We currently offer $500 tuition reimbursement. The increase will allow us to offer $1,000.
Oh, well, great. Well, there we have it.
Thank you for recommending that, Dr. Bellamy.
So wrapping up with a look at our revenue projections from the state, and we are expecting $554,168 additional dollars, so that's some good news. When we look at all of the different local, miscellaneous, other revenue sources, the net projected decrease is $75,251. That has to do with, you recall a lot of those local grants that we mentioned on the other slide, where there were things that are funded by local donors and patrons, but we're seeing that money go away. That's a big part of what that is. But again, these are net figures, so there are increases in there as well, but that's where the bottom line landed for local and other. So you take everything that you saw in the previous slides that are the changes that we are requesting or recommending or seeing in our operations, and you factor in these revenue changes, and the net funding request to the city is $3,868,421. Our general fund revenue budgeted expenses would increase by a little over $4.3 million with this proposal. And local support is definitely the key to achieving what Charlottesville City Schools achieves for the community and our students.
I have a question. So, given our enrollment going up, how much more did that give us in terms of state revenue?
So our per pupil allowance from the state, because of the local composite index, comes in around $2,000, close to $3,000. It's over $2,500. So unfortunately, the number that you may see if you look at the raw, per pupil funding from the state, it's $5,000 and some dollars. But Charlottesville's local composite index of ability to pay is 0.6772. It went up for this biennium. And so that diminishes the amount of per pupil money we get, because we only get 32% of whatever the state publishes as their per pupil funding amount.
Another interesting part to note with that is when the state allocates funding, they are allocating the funding based on what the standards of quality recommends. The number of teachers, the number of positions that they recommend. And they also use a lagging salary as their benchmark. So they're using, for instance, for a teacher's position, they use $48,000 as the salary, as the average salary for a teacher. So that's the premise on which they calculate any allocations out to the localities. I think we calculated it, we receive about, for each position, about $15,000
Or less.
or less.
So do we have any other questions from colleagues?
Okay.
Obviously, we cannot do the great work that we do in the city without our partners with the council and the city, so we really appreciate your attention and working with us on this. We only receive 32% of what the state publishes as the per pupil amount. That adds up to a lot that the city is contributing, so thank you very much.
May I ask, what was the request of the city last year?
2.7.
Right.
It was less than that, it was about 2 million.
The request
didn't-
versus
we
what we
didn't-
actually approved.
I think it was around 2 million. can look at
I
the-
believe we received around 2.6.
Yeah, maybe that was
2.6.
Yeah, we're trying to get salaries to a competitive place is really a high priority for the school board and the superintendent, so that's, I think, what you're seeing reflected in the budget this year.
The living wage is a big part of our budget, and we're pretty proud of that. I understand that the General Assembly took some action today.
Yes, I believe it was a party line vote where they voted against $15 an hour living wage yesterday.
When you look at the proposal and you look at the non-discretionary items and then the compensation items, it's about 75% of the request.
And just to give you a foundation, a reference point with this, the living wage for our custodial staff, as an example, they're 40 hours a week employees. The starting salary will be $30,000, about $30,200 a year.
with the increase?
That is the increase. And that represents, for some of our employees, a $2,500, $2,000, somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 increase in their salary. So $30,000 for a family we're pleased to be able to put that in the budget, but we also realize it is very difficult to feed a family on $30,000 a year. They do.
Well, not to mention, I mean, we were all in the housing committee, you know, what $30,000 does and what level of housing, you know, that puts a family at. So we appreciate the support, and I know there's a lot of focus and you know, an importance by all of us in talking about the living wage and then how that translates to affordable housing in the city.
I think that this year we are really being guided by the principle of equity in a lot of what we want to do going forward, and in terms of some of our programs, in terms of really serving our children equitably, but also serving our employees and making sure that that principle carries throughout our system on all levels. And I think that's what you're seeing here as well.
Any other questions on the proposed, or the school operating budget presentation? So, I think we're gonna move to the facilities request we've been talking about.
What we'd like to do now is give you a big picture overview of what are some of the initiatives that are going on across the Commonwealth, and then answer some questions that have been asked about what would a draft timeline look like if we moved forward with the reconfiguration. And the reconfiguration would be the renovation of Beaufort to house grades 6, 7, and 8, the creation of a centralized preschool center at our Walker campus, putting 5th grade back into the elementary schools, and then to position ourselves for the continued growth. What we will discuss tonight does not include any renovations at the elementary school level.
But I know except for the current, go ahead, I'm sorry. I remember asking this last week when we met. The numbers associated with getting the 5th graders back into elementary schools, because they have to go somewhere. So we're just assuming that right now we know that we can, just from my colleague's point of view, that we can do that with some of the space that would be freed up from the pre-K programs.
We have a chart that speaks to that in detail.
Okay, sorry.
We
Not
do.
to- not
We
to cut
brought
you-
that
I just
chart.
wanted you to know it's the detail.
I just know
answer
there's
that's
a
in there.
5th grade kind of missing there. So.
Yeah,
The
that-
5th grade is, so what this represents is the transition, housing our students during the transition, and it also represents how we've looked at the capacity in our elementary schools to house 5th grade.
So picking up the presentation from this point, because the other information, you've seen this, there's a lot of school construction that's been going on around us, and this chart is a couple years old. There's even more dots than that would now be applicable. Dr. Atkins covered kind of the top issues that we want to discuss, and this is a chart that was part of the package we used over the past couple years when we were out talking with the community about modernization and capacity and what are possible paths forward for the community. So I won't linger too long on this either, because I believe most of you have probably seen this, and most likely numerous times. So let's get...
Kim, if you'd go back to
Sure.
that slide, and we do want to point out that we are using the more conservative estimates here. With the preschool, the central preschool, the estimate cost would be between 15 and 20 million. We're using the $15 million. With the 6 to 8 campus estimated cost would be 45 to 60 million. We are using the 45 million.
And part of how we looked at that is we believe these projects will be a mix of renovation and new construction, and we looked at the cost per square foot using the proposed or estimated total square footage of these projects, which is over 232,000 square feet between those two projects, and then looking at the VDOE data and what the most recent cost per square foot data is that VDOE has collected. That said, I will say inflation is definitely at play right now in the market, so take that as you may. This is in response to the earlier question. So what we did is we looked at our current number of fourth grade classrooms this fall and the current pre-K classrooms that we have in each building, and a simple analysis, what's the difference? And you can see there that it's pretty much a wash, except at Burley-Moran, where there would be a deficit of 1 classroom, and Greenbrier, where there would be a deficit of 2 classrooms. And then at Clark, because Clark has a significant 3- and 4-year-old program, we actually would gain a classroom in that exchange between the 5th graders coming and the preschoolers going. Now, of course, this is if the reconfiguration were to happen now, but I think that's an interesting insight into that earlier question. So it's also worth mentioning that we started working with our our partners in facilities development, city facilities development, to plan for modular units at every elementary school. We started this process over a year ago as we started to see that we had to place some modular units, and not knowing what's ahead as a contingency plan, because that process takes time to determine where it's even feasible to place the modulars, what's the total number of modular units that we can even put on the various campuses. So that's a process that we've viewed independently from these other questions. And so for that reason, just keep in mind, when you embark on a construction project, modular units are usually part of what's happening unless you're building on a greenfield site. But because we have so much activity already going on with thinking about modular units, none of those costs or anything are included in the construction numbers that we've put up, because we're sort of on a separate track already assessing modular needs.
I will also draw your attention to, at Burnley-Moran, we are adding 2 teachers, recommending to add 2 teachers for fall 19.
And I believe the site plan, which is close to, if not already fully through approval, it calls for us, we're able to put 4 modulars comfortably out back along the paved pathway. And working with the principal there this year, because we were on the bubble for adding a teacher there this year, she could identify 1 additional classroom space inside the building if she rearranged some things, but then we're looking to the modulars. Okay, so funding options. This is just a quick description of what are the most common funding options for school projects. The general obligation bonds, which I'm sure our city council and the city administration is way more familiar with than I am. But then a mechanism that may not be known to you all, because it hasn't been, Charlottesville hasn't constructed anything with schools for a very long time, is the Virginia Public School Authority, their pool bond program. So there's a brief description there of what that involves, and what VPSA is like. There certainly can be other more creative funding options, but these are the 2 most prevalent, most common. To give you a little bit more information about the VPSA program and how strongly it is used by localities in Virginia to finance school projects, on the right is a list of all the different localities that had school building projects in the pool as of June 30th, 2007. This was just something we found in an old presentation from VPSA, but keep in mind that the average or normal maturity for these, or financing schedule when you're in the pool, is 20 years. They'll do less, they'll do more, as far as however you need to string out the payments, but 20 is common. So a lot of these folks are still in the pool. What's interesting is we contacted VPSA to find out who got in the pool last year, and the little small insert at the bottom shows you each locality that went into the VPSA pool last year to fund school projects. Every name on that list is also on the list from 2007, with the exception of Mecklenburg County. And some of the folks that went in 2018 participated in both the spring sale and the fall sale, so they went out twice. It's just an indication of how much activity there is across the Commonwealth in school construction.
So I'm just trying to get an idea of how this meshes with the local government's floating of bonds. So the VPSA floats the bonds, but then the local government provides the school division with the debt service to pay for the bonds?
So it is still it is still, becomes part of your debt service. The local governing body is still pledging full faith and credit on the obligation.
Okay.
The VPSA mechanism is commonly, it's almost smaller localities that don't ever float bonds themselves almost exclusively go through VPSA for their school projects. But you will see on that list, it's not just small localities that use VPSA, because sometimes the rate may be better. Your interest rate and so forth may be better going to the market through VPSA. These are questions that you would want to work with your financial advisor to assess and determine what's best for the Charlottesville community. We just wanted to just make sure everyone was aware of the VPSA program, because it is so heavily used in Virginia for school construction, and we know that Charlottesville hasn't used it in a long time. I don't know if it was used when CHS was constructed or not back in the 60s.
And if we look at the list of school divisions, there are 132 school divisions. There are approximately 100 school divisions that are represented here.
So to go to Kathy's point, so on the next slide, so they're basically a secondary market. They're purchasing the bonds that we still issue, so they're still Charlottesville municipal bonds, but they're the sole.
They purchase, yeah, the third bullet down sort of explains. So the bond program uses the VPSA uses the proceeds of its bond sales to guarantee purchase the locality's bonds.
So we're still issuing.
You are still.
Okay, so it's not like a contract between us and
That's
them,
correct.
it's still
And you still have to have, like, whoever your bond counsel is, all those pieces still come into play in the process. It is absolutely still pledging full faith and credit. It's a matter of whether the interest rates is more competitive and whether the process, provides any value for the community relevant to what it looks like when you do your normal general obligation bonds.
So I think there's a good chance, should we explore this further, that as a AAA bond rated city, that there's not an advantage for us in this, but.
Mm-hmm. And we noticed that the city's bond rating may be better than what VPSA has in the market. So that's to Mr. Murphy's point.
So it's not, right, it's not that much different from what would happen with an ordinary bond out there.
We only wanted to just raise it up because when we talk to our colleagues, they're always swimming in this pool. And so we just didn't want to leave something out of your view if it was something that was worth considering.
And Albemarle County is using it.
Albemarle County is on the list, yes.
So one question, in regards to Waynesboro City, is this what they're using to build their new school?
Yes.
Yes.
You would see Waynesboro just went in the last sale, and they were in before from prior work.
But as Mr. Murphy alluded to, I don't know if this will have a significant impact for us because we have a better bond rating than probably all of those localities or municipalities.
That very well could be the case.
It merits some consideration. We'll have to go out to our bond council and explore it.
And if you notice, there are many large school divisions that you would not anticipate would be on this list. Chesterfield County, Hanover County, Henrico County, Richmond City,
Virginia Beach City.
Virginia Beach, which is the second largest in the Commonwealth, third largest in the Commonwealth. Newport News City. So it appears, and there is a website, the VPSA website, that you can go to and get a great deal of information on this process and other localities that, as they apply for VPSA dollars, you will be notified.
One more question in regards to this from me. If just looking at the ask and what you all have asked, and even I know what will come down when we see the official number, I would be interested in hearing from Mr. Murphy or from Ms. Beauregard. If we were to explore this option, and as you alluded to, this would merit some consideration, what would be the next steps for us? Because it would behoove us to have this discussion. Oh, you have that as well?
Well, we have a timeline to do.
A proposed one,
There we go.
draft one.
No, so I saw that slide, but I was talking, yeah,
Yeah, on our
for
end,
us, like what would we do for,
On our end, we'd bring in Mr. Roddy, who's presented to you many times, and talk about what these two options look like based on the information we've received tonight. I would say that if it's counting against our debt ratios as the local government, then there's going to be little difference in the affordability. So it is still managing within the context of your CIP debt limits.
Right.
And so we'd have to work on what's currently in the proposed CIP as we get into March in order to figure that out.
Right, difficult decisions to say the least, but I do think it would behoove us for us to have that discussion sooner rather than later, so that we can begin to move forth in whatever direction. But this is something that's definitely going to be a hot topic, and a topic that, in my personal opinion, one that we need to support, but that'll be for a later moment in time.
Oh, no, you can say it.
For
Because we did see the three different, kind of big buckets, and do they all have to happen at once, or can some things happen first? So is that gonna be broken out in terms of like what happens with Buford versus what happens with the preschool?
I think this timeline sets that up for you.
Okay.
Looking at the transitions that would need to take place, we would be recommending that the renovation of Buford be the first step. And so we would be recommending that $3 million be used for the pre-construction funding, which would lay out all of the design, or get started with some of the Kim, go over the early stages
Sure.
of that for us, please.
So this is a timeline that just shows the pieces that have to come together to effectively put shovel in the dirt. At the first step is really allocating $3 million to enable all of the yellow boxes to happen. Basically, the first step is preparing an RFP for the architectural and engineering services, and going through that procurement process, and then awarding that contract, basically picking a partner to work through this whole process with. Then you move into the preliminary design, planning, estimating, and approval stage. And then that flows directly into the final design, planning, estimating, and approval stage, which generates your contract documents, and the contract documents are what go out to the market for bid. During that process, the preliminary and final design processes, that's when you're really digging into not just the design of the buildings. There's geotesting and surveying and all kinds of things that are being done to make sure that what's being drawn are not just pretty pictures, that can actually be constructed in the space allotted. It's very important. You're also constantly watching the market and evaluating, reevaluating your estimates. And then you're also planning the actual phasing and staging of the work. And this is complicated because we're not dealing with greenfield sites. There could be something said for going to the market with both projects together, with the option to award them separately together, meaning the pre-K center and the Buford. But is it possible, is it at all conceivable from an operations standpoint to handle those in parallel? I think that that would be daunting. But you do get into those details, and it's a lot of detailed work to get to the point of having a package to take out to the bidding market. And each step has, approximate dates and timelines. This is a fairly aggressive timeline, but doable. Again, if the VPSA has that, if that were the route chosen, which it very well may not be, but in general, bonds are sold whichever way you go, spring or fall. And I think that would be true for the city, and when you choose to handle your general obligation bonds.
So we would know more about how the phasing would be during this pre-construction period.
All of those details, the phasing and the staging, all of that is worked out as part of the preliminary and final design process. It's a tremendous amount of work.
So once you do Buford, you are then left with like a half-occupied Walker. You have to move forward. So it's not, I mean,
That is correct.
Certainly.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And also, as you're going through this design phase and you're determining your phasing and so forth, you're determining when you're gonna take what amounts of debt out to the market. You may have noticed on that earlier slide, Stafford County, Frederick County, they went out both in the spring and fall sales that VPSA offered. That's not uncommon, where you'll see schools go out one year and then they go out again because they're phasing the debt. You don't wanna take it on before you have to.
So if we look at the timeline, the construction of Beaufort, the renovation, we would look for occupancy to be somewhere around December 2022.
Between June and December, yeah, depending on. Okay.
And then we would move to the renovation of Walker.
And that's not to say if you're working with one contractor, they can start staging and mobilizing at another site while they're finishing at another. You know, those again are the details that are worked out by the experts through that planning process. So there can be some overlap, but you can hardly imagine launching them both at the same time, operationally. This is
you had to float your bonds
You would.
and the whole, that
at the
as
same
well.
time.
Right, but again, you'll see that there's all that detail work going on leading up to that 3-month window or so between where you're determining what debt is going out to the market when, either in a spring sale or a fall sale, and timing. Yep. So this is an extremely basic and high-level look at what the actual construction process looks like. And it's only up here to the extent that it has people understanding there's a mobilization phase that takes some time. Then you move into the actual construction. At the end of construction, there's significant punch out or punch list work that has to be done before the end goal is achieved, which is occupancy. So I don't want to move on to the next, and if there are any other questions, I'll be happy to answer any that I can, but otherwise I would like to move ahead into my favorite part of this presentation. This is a big thank you for the work that was completed at Clark Elementary this past summer. With the assistance of the principal there and Jeff Faust, we put together some interview questions. We asked the kids 3 questions, and their responses really, they tell the story. So, hold on.
And Kim, do we have the video?
We do. I'm going to put it up right
Thank you.
now.
What we did was we were hearing so many positive comments from the students at Clark, and there's a school culture change at Clark because of the modernization. So we thought it would be helpful to capture just some of their raw comments about what it means to them to have a new look in their school and to have all of the new furniture and the new environment.
So enjoy.
So I think that it was like beautiful. It was like amazing. I think other people would really like it and enjoy it. I was like, wow. I thought it was amazing. Well, I like it because it's like nice and modern, so new and nice, and you just really appreciate it. And I think about the classrooms, they're like really cozy. I think that I like the whiteboard kind of like covering things, like you get to write on them and stuff. It's kind of more roomy to me. My favorite part, I think, is the library nook because it's really cozy on like a rainy day like this. The lockers, I love the lockers. They're just my favorite. I also like the light panel and how like dimmable light. Why should we do this to other classrooms and feel locked down on youth? They probably more like new classes like us, and they probably really want to be like comfortable, like sit in like a library. Like so I did like course, I guess. But I like how they did the design like to make it look really fashionable, like in our class to make it look like modern. It's like pretty. It look everybody either. It makes it more a learning space than it was like more like a home to you. It's kind of like home away from home.
I don't know if you heard the student that turned around and did this. She turned around and she said, "We are rich."
So how
So-
are we supposed to say no to that?
You can't.
Yeah, you can't.
I think just to be clear, this is,
So what? And so the $1 million, we've worked with Clark. We're now in the process with Jackson Via, and it's a challenge to stretch those funds. What we did at Clark is we focused on, and this was through a really good collaborative process. We focused on the fourth grade creating the best classrooms we could create at Clark. So it's this optimal space, but we touched every grade level. So we were able to stretch those dollars so that fourth grade is the model, and so those were fourth grade students who were interviewed. But if you walk into Clark, you see the improvements throughout the building, and so that was wonderful. We're trying to stretch those dollars at Jackson Via to achieve the same, because we want to leave each school with an aspiration, a vision of what can be in that space, but also sharing the improvements as broadly as we can. So a big thank you to our facilities development colleagues in Public Works. They have been great partners through this process, and thank you so much. We just wanted, the school board hadn't seen that yet either. We just got that edited video, so thank you.
I can just tell you from watching that video, the lighting alone was so much nicer. And the environment clearly makes a huge difference, and I think we really do appreciate it, but that is work that we hope continues with the current CIP request, and next year we really expect to come back with a video like that from Jackson Via. And we're really excited, and I know Jackson Via is very excited about the work that's happening there next year. So, but I also wanted to see if there was any questions about the facilities request, if there was anything that any additional information y'all needed from us.
I will
Great.
also remind you that with the modernization that will take place at Jackson Via, there's still some areas at Jackson Via that we will not be able to affect. And specifically Jackson Via, we all know that they don't have a cafeteria. And they have warming units that the lunches are delivered to Jackson Via and put in the warming units. That in itself creates some obstacles at Jackson Via. Very recently, we had a fire in the warming unit. One of our officers was walking around in the building and could smell smoke. It was near lunchtime, and the lunches had been delivered, put in the warming units appropriately, and something happened. Something malfunctioned, and there was a fire in the warming unit. And quickly, the fire alarm was sounded. We evacuated the building. Staff did a beautiful job getting everyone out of the building. Fire department came on the scene and took care of everything. So it does present a hardship for the school not to have a cafeteria or a kitchen in the school.
Which I hear about every night at home. So we have to figure that out.
So when I was with you all on the school board, and that was at 2011, was my last year, and that you were at 3717. So the turnaround happened right when I left.
Well, Ms. Galvin,
So-
I think we could attribute to the increase to
Important
you.
work.
Oh, no.
Because
No,
one of the
I wasn't
goals,
angling for that.
you were angling to get enrollment up. And so we spent a lot of time working on getting enrollment to increase.
But I also know that at that time, the reconfiguration plan was motivated because of wanting to close a school. And we decided that no, we weren't going to do that. We were going to better redeploy our resources and students. But now we've got this beautiful problem of increased enrollment, and the reconfiguration plan still works. And I just want to make sure I'm having a tough time getting my head around that. I know you've got VMBO architects working with you, but it still made the most sense to do that for instructional reasons, in a nutshell, if you could.
It does. There are multiple reasons for the reconfiguration that we have now. It works because even when you were on the board and the enrollment was much less, we were going to have excess capacity still in our elementary schools. And so we were putting 5th grade back in order to use some of that excess capacity in the elementary schools. 6th grade would have gone to Beaufort with a renovation there, and then freeing Walker for the preschool center. But it would have still left the elementary schools with some open classrooms and more flexibility. What we find now is putting 5th grade back in the elementary schools, there will be little flexibility in the schools, and it will require some of the schools at some point to have mobile units on their property.
Still require okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And some of the thinking around the reconfiguration has to do with, we reflect back on the reason that we have the configuration that we have. We're one of the few school divisions in the Commonwealth with 3 transitions to high school. And this came about during the time of trying to reach racial balance in the schools. Beaufort was all black, Walker was all white, and collectively with the community, with the best thinking that they could garner during that time, given the climate that everyone was in, the configuration that we have now was the decision and was the result of all of those conversations. Well, we've moved forward and well beyond that now. It is still about equity, but now it's about equity having the appropriate capacity and appropriate spaces for the teaching and learning and responding to the developmental needs of our students.
Thank you.
Because the point that you raised just off of that last week really resonated with me, is just how much education has changed in this time. And even if the number of classrooms were to be static for just traditional classrooms, there's so many other needs that we see that kids, that we want to be able to be competitive with other options that families have, and that requires space. And
It does.
they're less traditional spaces, but they're important. And even when I walked through Beaufort and seen the work that was done with some of the STEM labs, I mean, that's a very different perspective in terms of those are additional spaces that may not have had a traditional place, 10 or 20 years ago. So
That's a great point. When we look at the high school CHS, the Sigma Lab, it was created for that very reason, to give collaboration space, to give working space, to give students an opportunity to leave their work out and return to it the next day or over multiple days. We don't have that flexibility at Beaufort. We'd like to create that flexibility. We would also like to create at Beaufort, given the developmental stage of our students at the middle school age, they need socialization and they need to be able to interact with one another. In our community, too often, whether it be in our classrooms or in our neighborhoods, our students are separated from one another. Black students in one area, white students in another area. The reconfiguration and the redesign of Beaufort would have common spaces where all of our students can come together. They can get to know one another, they can socialize, which is an important part of their social emotional development during the middle years age. Wraparound services, thank you, Ms. McKeever. The preschool center, wraparound services. Ms. Galvin, you remember when you were on the board, we talked about having the health services and the social services located in the preschool center, so it could almost serve as a one-stop shop for our families and for our students.
Still there.
Yes.
I'm just trying to meet the children and the families, students and families where they are, and so that it's not so difficult for families to get the support that they need.
Can I ask a question for, I guess this might be more for our staff, about what this means? How does this translate into our budget process? So there's that $3 million request there for planning
Reconstruction.
monies, and then there would be the finance expenses on the bond, which would be annual, right? And where do those, where prospectively would those come out of? Is the $3 million capital? That's a capital expense.
It's capital.
So that is that in the CIP? Because I know we've had this debate about school capital, but didn't we make a policy change where there's now part of the CIP that is about school, that's about schools? or-
There's a, there's a school area in the CIP already. I'm not looking at our spreadsheet right now, but it's over $4 million, right, in capital expenses for the schools. And it includes things like these $1 million plus renovations that happen each summer, along with, you have to paint the high school every year and things like that. But because of the timing of this discussion and all that, none of that is in the proposed CIP that went to the planning commission. So not the 3 million or the other reconfiguration or construction costs that are being discussed.
But it's conceivable that we could entertain the 3 million pre-planning. It would be an add-on, for sure.
Yeah, and Counselor Hill and I met with a couple school board members and Dr. Atkins last week, and we asked Mr. Murphy to kind of figure out at least this $3 million. We do have to have the conversation about the additional 1.6 million that is the ask for the operation side. So we haven't covered that, and we are having that discussion along with, you know, a committed investment to two significant public housing redevelopments at the same time. So that is going to, you know, be part of a very tough discussion that we have this work session. But we did ask them to you know, find this $3 million from somewhere, which we keep asking, you know, that, but we do want to definitely make the commitment to get this reconfiguration process rolling.
I think we've talked about this again with the housing stuff. It really matters where all these things fall on the timeline, because I don't know that everyone is ready to do everything right now. Yeah, and so just recognizing that as much as we have these big dollars in front of us, there is some pacing to those things, and that's why having a timeline like this is very valuable. So thank you for pulling that together in the last week for us to see. And obviously that's a discussion we have to have as we look at the other major capital requests that we have been looking at, specifically with housing timelines.
So this is the last slide in the presentation. It's just a reminder that this evening we've been discussing two different budgets, the operations budget and the capital projects budget. And then if you have a handout packet, there is a one-page summary of the entire request. We also refer to it as our budget changes document, so you can see all the proposal details there. But that's all that I have for you this evening as far as a presentation.
Leslie, just more historically, the operations delta, has it typically been in the 1 to 2 million?
No, this is the largest request we've gotten in a while from the schools since 2007, I believe. It was a $4.3 million increase.
Okay, what drove that at that time?
Was that your first year as superintendent? It was.
It was my first year.
So that partly was driving that. So I have a chart actually that we'll update that shows each increase each year. But this is the largest one since that time. So within 12 years, it hasn't been that large of an increase.
And I just, to follow up, I just added up the cost of the salary increases. That was about $2.7 million. So that leaves a balance of $1.7 million with the rest of their budget. So the vast majority of this ask is about pay scales.
Yeah, and also I think the non-discretionary, I just want to mention, like a lot of those non-discretionary items are also part of the, I mean, those are all things that happen on a normal basis.
Right,
But
you just can't, you
yeah.
can't not do
we're just
them.
not gonna take those out of the.
Right.
So the only potential is the school-based programs and supports for you all.
Correct.
The only
I mean,
potential,
we could,
Huh.
look at cutting,
Yes.
but I mean, I think we have to keep in mind that that's dangerous.
No,
Because
and it's not-
the school-based, I'm not saying that's what you want to do.
that's where
Yeah.
we would look first.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I'm speaking no specific, not more so to you, Ms. McKeever. Well, not saying it like that. I mean to my colleagues though, like we need to keep in mind when we take those kind of supports out of classrooms, the ramifications and the impacts that it has long-standing on our community. I don't know if we always take it into account. For example, if a student doesn't have a IA or some kind of necessary support in the class with them, how developmentally he or she may not be able to get to where they need to be the next year, which then creates a trend, and you don't know what happens. So, I mean, all of these items are necessary, and I know that there may be a narrative after this meeting in regards to that the schools always seem to ask for more money, but this is one of the most important places that we can allocate our funds, because this has a tangible impact on our community, not just today and tomorrow, but for generations to come. And we have to right some of the things that we haven't been doing.
I agree.
And there's no hope of state money, more state money.
Well, they've increased
I
it,
don't
but we won't get any
anticipate
more.
We're hoping that the governor's budget recommendations hold. This budget is built on the governor's recommendations.
So
Yeah.
it could get worse.
It could, yes, yes, and we have seen that happen, yes,
But we're not gonna speak that.
Right.
no,
We're not gonna speak that. It's gonna go
I
away.
agree.
There's a difference in speaking and claiming. We're not claiming it. You're gonna speak it, but you're not gonna claim it.
The line item, the Director of People Transportation Services, could you have our staff, have you all talked a little bit more about what that, so where are we there?
We have, and we've been working with Mr. Murphy and Ms. Beauregard to talk about a transition. For a number of years, the city has done an incredibly good job servicing our students and our families with transportation and running the transportation system. Jim Henderson tells me it has been since the 1980s. And one of the things that we have realized is that some of the flexibilities that we have in the school system is not as easy for the city, like giving incentives to just a select group of employees like our bus drivers in order to keep them employed and keep a healthy fleet of drivers. We can pretty quickly go to our board, get approval from the board, and make some flexibilities in that. So we worked with and in discussion with Leslie and Mike to make a transition back over to the city for the operation of the transportation system for the schools. What we will recommend is that we transition our coordinator director position first over to the schools, and then work with the person in that position to then make a plan and a schedule for the transition of bus drivers over to come under the schools. With the realization, I think we've talked about in length, that when we make that type of transition, we will have to handle each person individually, because the current bus drivers and staff, they have different lengths of service with the with the city, and there are benefits that they have already earned with the city that we would not want to diminish any of those benefits or opportunities that they've had. So we have to make sure that we work with them individually as we make that transition. But the goal will be to have the flexibility that we need, to also get bus drivers and the staff closer to our classrooms. and closer to the students that they serve. We realize that the first school person that students see in the mornings is usually the bus driver. And sometimes that sets the tone for the rest of the day. So we want to make sure that we embrace our bus drivers. They're part of our CCS family, that they're a part of the professional development, and that we get to interact with them in a more meaningful way.
I don't know where I remember hearing this or if we both heard this. I thought there also could be some synergies with once they're in the system that, so for example, cafeteria, if you need someone at that time of day, because what we've heard is that it's hard to really bridge a full hourly schedule with the pupil transportation schedule, and it's difficult for them to get other driving opportunities with this, the city's CAT system, just because of how kind of awkward that school day is for a driver in terms of the early morning kind of routes and then later in the afternoon. And there's that gap. Do you see opportunities for folks, I don't want to say double dip, but be able to take advantage of other opportunities within the schools as a result?
That's just a perfect example of how we might engage the bus drivers even more. When I was a principal, our bus drivers used to serve as cafeteria monitors. So after delivering the students to school, they would park their bus at my school, and then they would come in and be in the cafeteria during the lunch period with the students. And I can't tell you the relationships that were built during that time. It benefited us, but it also benefited the driver, because we were able then to offer the driver better health insurance benefits.
And the students have a familiar face.
And the students have a familiar face, not only on the bus, but in the school building. So they see that bus driver as a part of the continuum of services. Bus drivers, we are short bus drivers, but not just Charlottesville, around the area, everywhere. They're in need of bus drivers. So it's becoming very competitive, and we need to get in there and make sure that we have positioned our bus drivers to really be competitive, our benefits and our salaries to be competitive, and they want to stay with us.
Oh, I'm acutely aware of your bus driver shortage.
Yes.
So, are we okay to move on the agenda? Ms. Murphy, is that okay? You just look like you might want to say something. I don't want to give you the mic, though. So, the next thing that we have on the agenda is the equity policy discussion. And this is just, I think would be helpful for you all to understand where we are in the process of developing our equity policy. And I think potentially, hopefully inviting some of your colleagues to come to the superintendent can talk about this a little bit better, I suspect.
What we worked the board, and the direction that we're moving in is we would like to have an equity policy, and we've given you an example of one that we found in Fairfax County. We've pulled others also, but an equity policy that helps to guide our decisions. The instructional decisions, personnel decisions, all the decisions that we make in our school division that affect our employees and our students. The example that we pulled from Fairfax County was a joint policy, a collaboration between the Fairfax Board of Supervisors and the school board. And they together developed a policy that would service the entire community. And that's what we would like to discuss and recommend, that we work jointly. Currently, we are convening, I will be convening a committee, an equity committee. And one of the first initiatives that I would ask the equity committee to work on is making recommendations to the board, not for the policy itself, but for what they would like to have in the policy. And then we would be drafting and crafting that policy to take to the board for their review. But it would be, because the work that we do in the school system and the work that the city council does overlaps quite a bit. What city council does with housing affects our students. What we do with students affect what goes on throughout our community. So a joint policy would be reasonable. We have just posted on our website a supervisor supervisor of equity, a person that we will be hiring that will be taking a look at how we're making our decisions, looking at the professional development, helping to develop our training for culturally sensitive environments, and helping us to work with social emotional development.
I think a part of what we would like to see on the superintendent convening this committee, we would have, I would hope, at least a city council representative, including some other city employees on that committee as well. We've appointed 2 members of our board to that committee, and so we would love to also, not that you need to take any action at this moment, but we invite you to also participate in that committee. I hope I'm not speaking.
Well, you all can hear me. I think this is a phenomenal idea, and kudos to Dr. Atkins as well as the school board for taking this initiative. It's something that the community has desperately been asking for, and we've come a long way. And I know this group will do great work, and I really like the approach of you all not just saying this is what we're going to do and then place the committee, but also, you know, allowing the committee to help shape this. I think that is a very good approach, and you all should be commended for taking this approach. And I want you to know that we're really, well, I won't speak for everyone, but I'm really impressed by you all taking that step. So thank you.
So you all want 1 or 2 council representatives?
However, what you all decide, I think 2 is great, but we also recognize you're a smaller committee than us. And we are going to ask some of your city employees to join us as well.
Mr. Murphy has
We're
his
thinking
hand
around 25.
25.
And that would be, we will break that up into subcommittees.
Mr. Murphy had his
Mr.
hand
Murphy,
up.
did you have something?
Did you recognize me, Ms. Puryear? Thank you so much.
They just kept overlooking you, friend, and I was just didn't
You
want
had
you
your
to
one
get.
shot.
I didn't want you to get a complex. You know,
I won't get
complex,
lost.
but I
I'll be
overlook.
patient. So, as council is aware, and I just want to bring the school board up to speed, this is something I stated as a priority for the interim period in the city. And we've been working with staff for about 5 months now, looking at equity tools throughout the country. We convened a community group. Actually, they met today. And our first focus is looking at the internal policies of the city and our workforce and our policies and then our service delivery and how it may impact the folks who consume city services. So I feel like we're a little bit on the path already, and so I want to figure out how we meet along the way and honor the work that's already happening. But the objective is this, that you know, the city, you know, we talked a lot about ABRT last night, right? You know, we do a good job sometimes talking about what other folks are doing well or not and evaluating them, but this is meant to put the mirror up first and then go out, right? You know, when I talked about this first in August, I gave a laundry list that starts before children are born of the areas where we have inequity in the city of Charlottesville, starting with, you know, infant mortality rates, social mobility, readiness for school, achievement, juvenile justice, foster care, et cetera. It goes all the way through the lifespan. And, you know, while it has always been the focus of my career to work on those things, right, we have to look at the job that the big systems do in their equity policies. So that's where we're starting. I appreciate the idea about the big policy statement, and certainly we would want to participate in that, just need to figure out where they join.
That makes sense. I think we can find, well, first of all, I think there probably is appropriate to have basically the city path and a school path, but also have a joint kind of, you know, I don't know, accountability
Yeah.
to each other as we move forward. And I would hope, because so many of y'all are also using school services or have been in the schools, that there would be I still would think that the committee could benefit from the counselor's perspective on it.
And I'm definitely interested, so I'll put that as one of the two.
So is there any way that we could maybe, so if there's anybody else, great, just another meeting. But I know everybody's a little busy, but, so I'll have.
I guess we could talk about this like in a regular appointment, the way we typically appoint members to a board. And we typically do that in closed session.
Great. You guys can work on that together. We invite you to participate.
Thank you for the invitation.
And if you, once you do appoint a member or two, whichever you decide, certainly
Ready.
Dr. Atkins and I would be happy to.
You work with Mr. Murphy on the staff appointments, and I guess the only, following up on his comments just now, I think it might behoove us to have some continuity with some of the folks who are helping to serve on the group you formed to also possibly serve on this. I realize it's double duty, but it at least allows us to make sure that we're on parallel tracks.
Great point.
Makes sense.
And I would like to kind of work more also separately, kind of just to brainstorm maybe a path forward that would be best serve both of those entities, just so that we can not be duplicative.
Yeah.
This list that Fairfax put together, though, is comprehensive and impressive. I mean, this is a really nice model to look at.
I will tell you, after reading over the Fairfax model with that lens, the equity lens for decision-making, one of the movements forward that we have recommended to our board is reflected in our program of study. And we know that equity actually starts with access. So in our program of study for next year, we are recommending that us at Walker, that we will start the honors option classes at Walker. Therefore, we will have classes in which, if the board approves, in which our students will have an option as to whether or not they will go for the honors level instruction in the class. So you will have students who could be an academic student or an honors student in the same classroom. I met with staff from the high school to talk about training that our teachers will go through this summer in order to prepare everyone for the honors option classes in our academic classes in English and in mathematics. When we talk about equity, using this type of a lens to make decisions is what equity is all about. So I have made it very clear that will cause our classrooms, our classes, to look very different next year. But if we have made a community commitment, a school division commitment to equity, this is where it starts. So it's a big movement forward. It really is a game changer. So I'm really excited about the possibilities for moving forward and equity for all.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And I hope that the school board approves and is in agreement, which I'm pretty sure you will be, but just from a community perspective, that literally will change the game and eliminate a litany of barriers. So kudos to you all again. That is absolutely phenomenal, and I appreciate you all being a leader for the Commonwealth in that regard, because I'm sure there'll be others who would want to follow suit. But that's absolutely amazing. So great work.
I also want to remember, I'm trying to remember, because in again, 2010, 2011, we did the collapsing of the classrooms. That's when it began.
You're right.
So maybe it might be helpful to share some of that.
Well, it started at the high school, Charlottesville High School. Several years ago, there were classes when I first came into the school division at the high school that were a part of the program of study that were below grade level. So students were leaving middle school and they had been assigned to classes below grade level, and they would go to the high school and make selections and choose classes that were below grade level. And so we did away with all of those below grade level options for students.
We had combined teachers.
Then we had collaboration that was going on, and then we moved to the honors option and we started in social studies. And so Thomas Taylor worked a great deal on that. Then we have Eric Irizarry, Dr. Irizarry, who's there, and he's done an amazing job expanding those honors options. Now we will move that down starting at Walker. And it will be at Walker, Beaufort, and the high school, setting the stage for excellence at all levels for all students. So it's a big transition for us.
And so, Rose, I just want to chime in that today, Sherry and I attended a meeting with some Curry School professors, and we have this kind of middle school group that with some individuals across the state. We are talking about the same issue, and we had someone there from Henrico County because they have similar equity issues with the eastern part of the county as opposed to the western side. And when they initially talked to the public, they, was the notion of magnet schools and things like that. But when you really got down and had the focus group, the parents felt that what we're doing at Charlottesville High School is what they really want, and what we're talking about potentially doing with Quest is what they really want. And so I think that we're definitely heading in the right direction. So it's very encouraging to hear, what the, well, for one thing, what the professors and the scholarly type are saying, but actually what's happening every day in the schoolhouses. So I think we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any other questions about our kind of equity lens and move path forward? Any other discussion items at this point? So I just wanted to do a kind of a housekeeping matter with respect to a vacancy that we have on our board, just for purposes of the public and information generally, to kind of note how the school board is planning on proceeding with respect to the application process and the timeline. So I just, if that's okay, if y'all don't mind me just kind of announcing what those are. So we are going to start accepting applications for, do I have the timeline? Okay. I have it right here, so when are the applications due?
It's right here.
Next February 1st. Okay. So we are going to be on our website. There will be an application. It's fillable, and you can just go ahead and submit it to Ms. Thacker. And we are giving strong preference to former school board members and those folks who are not planning on running for election this year. Ms. Loffer's term would end on December 31st, and so whomever is appointed would have to run if they would. We did not want to give an advantage to any particular person, or we don't want to give an advantage to anybody in a potential election. So that's why we're offering this preference. In addition, given kind of some of the things that we've been discussing today, there's a lot going on right now in the school division, and having a former school board member who can kind of hit the ground running and offer their expertise that they've had developed while they were on the board is something that we really value. So the application, but we are open, the application process is open, and the application will be on the website. Now it's going to be due on Friday, February 1st, 5-ish? 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock on Friday, February 1st. And so email the application to Ms. Thacker that will also be online. Now, because of the statute, we are required to then have a public hearing. That public hearing will be held on Thursday, February 7th at 5 p.m. That is our normal school board time. There will be probably a list of questions that we ask those candidates, and then whoever is, there will be no other candidates that we will consider after that public hearing. So you have your application due on February 1st, then the public hearing February 7th, and on February 21st at 5, we will, after our budget approval, we will appoint a new school board member, which they will then begin on the first meeting in March. So that is the timeline, just trying to follow the statute in terms of all of the requirements for public hearings and notice. So that's all the housekeeping business from my end. Hearing no objection, the school board can stand adjourned.
Yeah, do we want to open for public comment?
That would be fine.
Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak?
Can we invite you to go up to the mic and
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to make a comment. My name is Emily Dreyfus, and I'm a community organizer with the Legal Aid Justice Center, and I'm on the advisory council for the Public Housing Association of Residents. I very much appreciate the focus on improving equity, and I would encourage you to look at school climate changes and ways that you can put some improvements into place urgently. The concerns I hear could be well addressed through more rigorous implementation of culturally responsive, positive behavioral improvements and supports, and social emotional learning, restorative justice, and my teaching partner. These are all evidence-proven programs, and some level of them is being implemented at this point for some of these programs, but a much more rigorous approach would be very timely. I recently also heard a rumor that some of the Check and Connect funding is ending this spring, and that program provides very practical support to help kids be in the classroom learning, and it's been available in certain schools for a limited population, but when I heard it was decreasing, that was very concerning, and I don't know if that's misinformation or not. You're shaking your head, it's okay. So potentially that's wrong information, but I would really love to see Check and Connect expand. It's a locally research-proven program, and it seems very valuable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.